Well, it's another hot and muggy day, and got a train coming here. This is Saintsville Road. I'm approximately at MP 281. Look at that. We got a EMD. Well, that one's an MTH Pennsylvania turbine that chuffs like a normal steam locomotive, and somehow I doubt a turbine sounded like that. And this was the Lionel turbine that just sounds like a Lionel from the 1940s with smoke. And it's actually, in my mind, proportionally a better looking locomotive than the MTH one is. Tires are a little bit small, the wheels are a little bit small, but the darn thing runs good, like everything else I've seen from MTH. And I'm believing that this is one of their entry locomotives. Entry for MTH, because they're a little upscale. And of course, that was one of the higher end locomotives for Lionel back in the late 40s and early 50s. Isn't it amazing that thing runs as good as it does still now? And that would be Rail King. And it is sort of that semi-scale that Lionel has. I guess it's 1 in 58 or something like that. Same as that MTH right there. That runs very well as well. Yeah, these are the Rail King. So they're not scale low. They're more kind of like that Lionel semi-scale. 158 versus 148. just like that one there is 027 158 scale. Not quite O gauge, but sort of a halfway in between scale. A scale turbine would be a whole lot larger. So this falls into the category of toy trains as well. So I don't think that I can consider this a model railroad. It's about having fun with, toy trains for me. Having said that, I am kind of a history buff, and the period of time that I'm most interested in is probably the same as most people who are rail fans, is that time after the Second World War into the 60s. And partly because that's when I was introduced to Lionel. And of course, that's gotten a little bit out of control. Right? Just did a video on these. I got one more somewhere. That one I'm going to modify, open that up and put a hook there so I can do a AA New Haven. I don't think there's anyone who's ever done that. I need another shell with that paint scheme. So there's some things that'll happen hobby-wise to enhance my selfish desire to enjoy these old Lionel sheet metal frame ALCOs, which are really still my favorites of all this. Now, there's a couple that have kind of come into my consciousness as being really nice. One of these K-lines, the K-line Trainmaster by, it's a Fairbanks Morse Trainmaster replica, I guess. And then, of course, there's the continuation of the ALCO FAs. That's one done by Williams. This guy right here has earned its spot to be one of my favorite locomotives just to let run around. It runs so smooth, it pulls well. And it's short enough that it doesn't look oversized. Well, it does, but it doesn't look way oversized on my 027 layout. But anyway, where I was going with that is that era where they went from steam into diesel was actually quite fascinating for me. I mean, from an engineering standpoint, you had the legacy from the past, the pinnacle of the steam technology, developing things like that. This one for Baltimore and Ohio. And then you had the early diesels, like the ALCOs. Now, some call these first generation, but they're actually the second generation. The first generation were in the 30s, and they were a disaster. I'm not going to get into those. So the 244 was actually the second series of diesels that ALCO produced. And, of course, they rushed it and had problems. They eventually sorted it out. And, of course, the 251 was the successor, and that was a very, very successful diesel made by ALCO. Interestingly enough, the 251 ended up in things like tugboats, generators, and a bunch of other diesel applications other than just the railroad. And in a twist of fate, after the Montreal Locomotive Works got done doing things, Fairbanks Morse ended up with the brand. They owned the rights and the patents to the 251 ALCO design diesel. So I guess as of a couple of years ago, I don't know if it's still the case, you could actually still get spare parts for those 251s through this company, Fairbanks Morse, who generated these Trainmasters and a bunch of these locomotives in the 50s. They didn't survive. They were out by the 60s. And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things is both of these had marine applications in their repertoire. Of course, Fairbanks Morse started that way with their opposed piston diesel that, they were used in stationary applications like generators and stuff like that, but they were a backbone of the submarines in the Second World War. They were the power, and they did quite well. And they continued for quite some time powering submarines, the diesel-powered submarines. And of course, the ALCO 251s, they got used in tugboats, other marine applications. So they both had marine roots. And all this technology was pretty much developed 20s, 30s, and then matured in the 40s and the 50s. And by the 60s, the technologies began to sort of shake themselves out, where the applications determined the success and failure of the different designs. These guys never did get past the marine successfully. They were a little bit too delicate and a little too expensive to maintain and repair for the railroads, so they kind of went away. For that matter, interestingly enough, some of the Fairbanks Morse diesels that the New York Central had got EMD prime movers in place of their Fairbanks Morse opposed piston two-stroke diesel prime movers. Another little twist in history. And ALCO, they just slowly went away. They went from being one of the largest locomotive manufacturing operations in the United States, in fact, the world, to being completely out of business. It's an American story. It's a New York State story. And to those people who are interested in history, learning about ALCO, their highlights and then their demise, there's a lot of lessons that are playing out even today from that storyline. Definitely worth doing. Anyway, back to my topic here. That era, there was a lot of new technologies that were developed, and then, as I said, kind of sorted out based on the applications as a success or too expensive or outright failure. So this was yet another ripple in the matrix of technology for the railroad industry. These Pennsylvania turbines, of which they only made a couple. They didn't make many, and they didn't last very long either. They were not a success financially. But they're interesting. And I think the impact on the toy and model train world really was a lot more than their true impact in the real world. I mean, this is an MTH Rail King. It's not, a scale O, it's an O gauge, kind of almost a Lionel scale. That'd be close to 1 to 58, kind of like this one right here. Another MTH Rail King. And Lionel made a gazillion of these things with different numbers. And it was one of their more popular, locomotives that they sold. But back to the real world, they didn't make as much impact in the real world as they did on the toy train marketplace. Along with the Pennsylvania T1, and along with a few other technologies. I'll tell you, there's one, I'll just put this in, that I think is so interesting, and that's the story of Baldwin. They were huge, and then they built the huge Eddystone plant, thinking they were going to dominate the world. As the market was going away from the product that they were selling, they were primarily a steam locomotive manufacturer trying to catch up with the times with their diesels. And one of the most interesting diesels I think that was ever put out was the Centipede. Now I understand that didn't make a big impact on the world, but they were used, and it strikes me that the wheel arrangement of the Centipedes is an awful lot like a GG1, and of course that's an awful lot like something like that. So basically the people who designed steam locomotives, when they were asked to do the electrics in the diesels, some of their theories about traction kind of carried over. I just find that interesting. But I like these things, whether they were real or scale or, prototypical, it don't matter. They're fun, and that's what this is about. And while they're fun, they do point out some interesting things in history as well. So I'll let it go with that. So that's the turbine. It's a Lionel iteration from the 50s. This happens to be a Lionel iteration of effectively a Pacific, a 462. Yeah, I'm going to say that's from the 90s. It's a very nice running locomotive. It's got a can motor and all that. And nice little train. I like this one right here. But we're beginning to get into the weeds again. I'll probably end up running a bunch of ALCOs today. Not sure I'm going to put it on film. Sometimes you just want to run trains. No, I just can't help myself. Take a look at the casting of the shell on this 2055 from the 50s. You know, the rooftop, where that is, whistle, bell, sand, right? This is where your E unit is. Take a look at this one right here. Gotta believe that old tooling got put back to use. You know, about the only difference is can motor versus the conventional. And this one is a 464, and this one here has a different trailing truck. Of course, it has all the sound and all that stuff too, but you know, I really like the fact that Lionel repurposed a lot of these tooling from their heyday, from their, you know, their greatest era. Well, we have another one coming, another intermodal. See, I always have two things I look for: a special engine, a DPU, or an EMD. And when I hit all three, I leave. So far, we haven't gotten anything special. Maybe this one will be different.